The grinding, rhythmic pulse of the well pump, usually a sound of life and stability to Elias Thorne, was replaced by a hollow, strained thrum, a noise akin to a dying heart trying to push blood through clogged arteries. Elias sat bolt upright in his narrow bed, the sound cutting through the pre-dawn quiet of his small, weathered farmhouse like a surgeon's knife. He didn't need to look at the clock to know something was wrong. That pump, a rebuilt 1980s workhorse, had a distinct, deep growl when it pulled water from 50 feet down, a sound he'd learned to sleep through over 2 decades. This was something else. This was effort without result. He threw on a faded flannel shirt and work boots, the laces flopping as he raced across the damp grass toward the small, cinder-block pump house nestled beside the ancient oak. The chill of the late October morning bit into his skin, but his adrenaline was already surging, hot and metallic. He shoved open the pump house door. The unit was vibrating violently, a feverish shaking, and the pressure gauge was flatlining, 0 psi. He killed the main breaker, silencing the desperate machine. The sudden quiet was deafening, heavier than the grinding had been. Panic, cold and nauseating, began to curl in his stomach. The well wasn't just his water source. It was the lifeblood of his whole operation. He ran a small organic greenhouse and used the clean, cold aquifer water for everything: the irrigation system, the washing station, and of course his own kitchen and bath. Without water, he had 48 hours, maybe less, before the tender lettuce seedlings in the main hoop house withered to dust, taking his entire fall profit with them. He rushed outside to the wellhead. It was a simple 4-inch steel casing topped with a bolted cap, sitting a foot above the ground, except it wasn't. A thick, gray, pasty substance had been liberally applied over the cap, running down the sides of the steel casing, already hardening in the cool air. It was a professional job, smooth, almost artistic in its cruelty. There were no messy bucket spills, no drips, just a perfect, impervious seal. Elias crouched down, touching the cool, grit-filled surface. His mind, usually sharp and practical, stalled. Cement, concrete. Someone hadn't just vandalized his property. They had entombed his sole source of water in a shell of stone. He knew instantly who was responsible. There was only one person in 5 square miles with the audacity, the resources, and the sheer, petty malice to pull off such an act. Veronica Vera Sterling, her property a sprawling, hyper-modern, glass and marble monstrosity referred to locally as the Sterling Compound, sat on the ridge just 300 yards north of Elias's humble lot. Vera had moved in 2 years prior, importing her West Coast wealth and a level of entitled frustration that had made Elias's quiet existence a living hell. She complained about the smell of his compost, the sound of his tractor, the height of his uncut grass, and, most frequently, the visual blight of his rustic wellhead visible from her infinity pool terrace. Elias stood up, his vision blurring slightly. This was no prank. This was an act of economic warfare. He didn't wait. He didn't call the sheriff, whom he knew had Vera Sterling on speed dial for monthly noise complaints about birdsong. He walked straight toward the ridge, crossing the invisible, mutually respected property line with a sense of violation that mirrored the concrete he'd just seen. The Sterling compound was a fortress of privilege. The front gates were heavy, forged iron, but Elias strode around the newly planted cypress border and found a back service entrance door. He didn't knock. He hammered. The door was answered by a young man in a clean gray uniform, one of Vera's rotating staff of assistants. The assistant's eyes widened at the sight of the rough man, covered in dirt and early morning dew, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "She needs to come out," Elias said, his voice dangerously low. "Now." "Sir, Mrs. Sterling does not take calls or meetings before 9 a.m. I can leave a message for her personal secretary?" "I don't need a secretary," Elias growled, pushing past the startled assistant and walking into the cavernous, sterile foyer. The house smelled of money and ozone. "I need the woman who illegally destroyed my property to tell me how she plans to fix it." Veronica Sterling appeared on the floating staircase, clad in a silk robe the color of expensive wine, sipping from a delicate porcelain cup. She was 50, impeccably preserved, with a face that looked permanently bored. She paused halfway down, looking down at Elias as if he were something that had been tracked in on the soles of her custom slippers. "Oh, look," she said, her voice a cultivated, icy drawl that barely registered surprise. "The local dirt farmer. Get him out, David. This is why we have security protocols." Elias ignored the panicking assistant. Well, you had it filled with concrete." Vera took another slow sip of her drink. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Thorne. Cement? Really? You should look into maintenance. Perhaps your equipment is old and deteriorating." "Don't lie to me, Vera." Elias took 2 steps closer, forcing her to stop her descent. "I saw the tire tracks on the grass. They lead straight from the back of your newly poured gazebo foundation to my pump house. And I know you hired a crew to work overnight. That's a minimum of half a yard of fast-set cement." A slow, self-satisfied smile finally curved her lips, a look of vindicated boredom. "Even if I did, Mr. Thorne, and let's be clear, I did not, that well is an eyesore. It is a detriment to the aesthetic integrity of the entire neighborhood, and frankly, I had my property surveyed. I suspect your decrepit little shack of a pump house, and certainly the unsightly well cap, encroached upon my legal setback by at least 6 inches. 6 inches? Elias laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You cemented my only source of water over 6 inches? That's not a boundary dispute, Vera. That's criminal destruction of property." "It's mitigating a nuisance," she corrected, finally gliding down to the marble floor, radiating condescension. "Call the sheriff, Elias. Go ahead. It's a civil matter, and I'm afraid I have $30,000 a day for lawyers. Do you have $30,000 a month for a water truck? Because I doubt the county allows you to truck in water for commercial agricultural use." The last sentence was the stinger. It wasn't just about water. It was about the commercial agricultural use. She knew with chilling precision exactly how to ruin him. Her wealth and legal team had already calculated the exact point of his maximum vulnerability. Elias stared into her eyes, vacant, blue, and utterly devoid of remorse. He saw not just arrogance, but a cold, hard truth. She could do this. She had done this, and the system was built to protect her, not him. "You've signed your own death warrant," Elias whispered. "Not as a threat, but as a prophecy." Vera merely raised an eyebrow. "Is that the best you can do?" "I expected more drama, honestly. David, escort Mr. Thorne off the premises. And call my grounds crew. We need to install some motion sensors on that side of the property. I don't want his filth disturbing my new landscaping." The next 48 hours were a blur of futile, agonizing activity. Elias called 3 different local well companies. They all gave him the same news after a horrified visit. "It's a complete plug, Elias. Looks like they used high-strength grout, not just basic mix. Even if we chip it out, the pressure of the application may have forced the cement down into the casing. Best case? We try a diamond core drill, which is a 6-figure risk. Worst case? You've got a geological disaster, the aquifer access is gone, and you need to drill a new well 50 feet away. That's minimum 50 grand, Elias. Up to 70. He tried the sheriff. Deputy Reynolds, who knew Elias since childhood, sighed heavily on the phone. "Elias, I'm sorry, man. I went out there. Yeah, it looks like concrete. But she's got a thick file of complaints about you being in violation of some made-up HOA rule that doesn't apply to you. She also has a signed statement from her landscape architect saying they were reinforcing an exterior drain and that the application was mistakenly extended over the property line. They'll plead civil dispute. We can't touch her. Get a lawyer." The lawyer he called, a slick, expensive man downtown, charged him a $2,000 retainer just to tell him Vera's position was unassailable in the short term. "She's got deep pockets, Mr. Thorne. She can delay this for 5 years. 5 years of you not having water. You'll fold long before she ever pays a dime." He sat on the edge of his porch late that afternoon, the sun setting over the hill, casting a long shadow of the concrete monolith. The pump was silent. The greenhouse was already beginning to smell of dry earth and dying hope. He had 10 jugs of water left for drinking. He was officially out of business and soon out of a home. That night, Elias drank half a bottle of cheap whiskey and wept for the first time in 10 years. Not for anger, but for the profound, overwhelming defeat of being crushed by sheer, unadulterated wealth. Then, the weeping stopped. The liquor hadn't dulled his pain. It had sharpened his focus. He realized the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended, for people like Vera. Justice wouldn't come from a judge or a deputy. It had to come from an engineer. He stood up, steadying himself on the porch railing. He pulled out his phone, bypassing the contacts and dialing the only person he knew who would understand the kind of cold, geological spite required for his coming task. His cousin, Dale. Dale worked for a commercial concrete and foundation company 80 miles away, and you. The air in the wooded gully behind the Sterling compound was cold, thick, and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Elias stood beside Dale, his cousin, who was wrestling with the thick black hose attached to the back of the unmarked concrete pump truck. The drum behind them churned with a noise barely louder than a distant heavy sigh, masking the sound of their whispered instructions. It was 2:37 a.m. Elias's flashlight beam, tightly focused and taped over with a piece of dark cellophane, illuminated the inconspicuous clean-out hatch where Vera's 6-inch main sewer line plunged downhill toward the massive septic field. The hatch was exactly where the zoning map said it would be, partially obscured by the foundation of a newly installed, decorative stone wall. "We're going through that access point," Elias murmured, pointing with a gloved hand. "It's the closest practical junction to the house. Any further down, and the sheer volume of waste might blow back before the grout sets. We need maximum internal pressure." Dale, a massive man with a permanently tired face, wiped sweat from his brow despite the chill. "This grout isn't designed for pressure, Elias. It's designed to fill voids. You're trying to turn a drainage system into a static pressure vessel. The minute we hit that activation lever, this whole pipe's going to fight back. You got 3 minutes of workable time, maybe 4, before it flash cures into bedrock. We need to be gone before it even starts to set." Dale had brought a specialized, high-viscosity grout mixed with a chemical accelerator, a cocktail designed for sealing underground utility leaks that could solidify into unyielding stone faster than the police could arrive. They pried the clean-out hatch open. The smell that instantly bloomed in the night air was an acrid, raw sewage stench that made Elias gag, forcing him to pull the bandana tied around his neck over his mouth and nose. "That's the smell of her life savings flushing away," Elias muttered, securing the pump hose nozzle over the opening. He used industrial-strength duct tape and a clamp Dale had brought to create a temporary seal around the connection point. This wasn't about neatness. It was about containing the initial explosive back pressure. Dale climbed back into the cab of the pump truck. He looked out at Elias, his face pale and serious in the dim light of the dash. "Remember what you said, Elias. Balance. This is about balance." Elias gave a sharp, curt nod. He retreated 20 feet, the ground under his feet feeling suddenly unstable. He raised his hand, gave Dale a thumbs up, and then clenched his fist. The signal. A mechanical crunch from the truck's engine signaled the pump engaging. It wasn't the slow, heavy churn of a mixer, but the hydraulic roar of a forced injection system. The truck vibrated, the ground shook slightly, and Elias could hear the grout, thick as lava, shooting down the black pipe. Thwump, thwump, thwump. The sound of the high-viscosity grout hitting the water in the sewer line was sickeningly audible, a deep, resonant sploosh followed by a wet, strangled gurgle. Elias saw the thick tape around the clean-out hatch bulge dangerously, the seal fighting against the internal pressure of the forced injection. The pipe was now effectively a cannon barrel, and Elias was forcing the shell down the muzzle. Dale held the pump for precisely 45 seconds. That was long enough to inject nearly 100 gallons of the quick-set mixture directly into the path of the main flow, creating a column of hardening cement that was guaranteed to fill the entire 6-inch diameter of the line for at least 20 feet. Right at the junction where the line turned steepest downhill, Dale cut the engine. The silence that followed was total, except for the desperate hiss of pressure escaping from a tiny pinhole leak in the tape. "Go! Go! Go!" Elias yelled, ripping the hose connection out. He didn't care about the spray of foul water that splattered his coat. He grabbed the hatch cover and slammed it back down, kicking dirt and rock dust over the connection point to hide any residual mess. Dale backed the massive truck away, his face grim. Within 2 minutes, they were back on the logging road. Elias drove his pickup ahead of the mixer, ensuring no one saw the commercial vehicle near his property line. "It's done," Dale said, his voice flat as they reached the highway. "You just sentenced the Sterling mansion to a week of porta-potties minimum. Maybe a month. No crew is getting that out without excavating the line completely, and that stuff sets harder than basalt. We just gave Vera Sterling a solid, unmovable geological middle finger." "It's not enough," Elias said, staring ahead into the dark. "But it's a start. Now we wait." Dale didn't argue. He took his payment, a surprisingly large stack of cash that Elias had drained from his emergency savings, and drove away, disappearing into the dark highway noise. Elias returned home, scrubbed his clothes in the limited water remaining in his rain barrels, and lay in bed, not to sleep, but to listen. He listened for sirens, for shouting, for the sound of helicopters. He heard nothing but the chirping of crickets. The silence of the night was the silence of ignorance. The first sign of distress came not in a scream or a siren, but in a dull, vibrating bass note that carried down the ridge at 9 a.m., exactly as Vera Sterling was presumably enjoying her mid-morning herbal tea. It was the sound of a very powerful, very expensive industrial-grade garbage disposal trying to evacuate a week's worth of food scraps. It ran for 30 seconds, stopped, then tried again, laboring. Elias, sitting on his porch, nursing a cup of coffee and the last remaining jug of water, smiled grimly. The house was trying to flush. The concrete was holding. The second sign came 45 minutes later, the distant, high-pitched wail of the pool pump's backwash cycle engaging. Vera's infinity pool, an engineering marvel, used an intensive filtration system that regularly flushed hundreds of gallons of pool waste and chemicals into the main septic drainage field. This was the catastrophic load Elias had been banking on. Elias stood up. He walked to the furthest corner of his property, where he had a clear, unobstructed view of the back terrace of the Sterling compound. The backwash cycle ran for 2 minutes. And then everything stopped. Elias didn't see it happen, but he could imagine the sudden, explosive failure. The pipe, under thousands of pounds of head pressure from the house's vertical plumbing and the pool's industrial pump, meeting the immovable object of 20 feet of high-grade, fast-set concrete. The sewage and the chemically treated pool water, unable to go forward, had only one place to go: back. The eruption began at 9:55 a.m. First, a panicked cry, thin and shrill, carried on the breeze. Then, a sustained, ear-splitting scream. Elias saw a figure. It was David, the young assistant, sprinting across the polished travertine terrace, slipping slightly, his hands thrown up in alarm. He was running toward the main glass doors of the mansion. Then Elias saw the water. It wasn't water. It was a chocolate-brown cascade of sewage, pool effluent, and general residential waste that was now pouring out of a lower-level window well, flooding the pristine white marble patio and running in dark, sickening rivers down the terraced landscaping Vera had so fussily guarded. The sheer volume was staggering. It looked like a flash flood of filth. The scream was joined by a second, far more powerful one, Vera's. It was not her usual icy drawl. It was a primal sound of shock and utter revulsion. She appeared at the terrace doors, still in her silk robe, her face contorted in an expression Elias had never seen. True, unadulterated horror. She wasn't horrified by the criminal act. She was horrified by the filth, the ultimate insult to her pristine environment. The chaos escalated instantly. Workers, gardeners, cleaners, and other staff began running in every direction. Someone was trying to turn off a valve slipping in the expanding mire. The odor, even from 300 yards away, was noticeable, carried by the morning breeze. Vera, shrieking orders, disappeared back inside, presumably to call the cavalry. By 10:30 a.m., the first professional vehicles arrived. Not the sheriff, but a massive tanker truck from a municipal waste company, followed by a smaller utility van plastered with the name Pipe Pro Emergency Plumbing. Elias watched, detached as the plumbers, real professionals, not the foundation crew Vera had used, began the agonizing process of locating the blockage. They deployed cameras, snake lines, and electronic locators. By noon, the lead plumber, a massive man in oil-stained overalls, was on his knees on the manicured lawn, screaming into a satellite phone, his face crimson. The problem, Elias knew, was that the blockage wasn't a blockage. It was a plug. An internal foundation, impossible to clear with any standard equipment. At 2:00 p.m., a sleek black sedan pulled up the driveway. Vera's lawyer, Rickman, already wearing a look of expensive, weary disbelief. He was shown the clean-out hatch, which was now surrounded by diggers and bewildered plumbers. Elias, watching through binoculars from his porch, saw the lawyer point a manicured finger at the perfectly sealed manhole, then saw the plumber, exasperated, throw his hands up and point down the hill. The sight Elias had been waiting for came 5 minutes later. The plumbing crew, realizing the clean-out access was futile, had brought in a small excavator. They tore into the ground, following the sewer line until they hit the concrete plug. The plumber pulled out a jagged, gray chunk of the cured grout, a perfect, solid cylinder of destruction, and held it up for the lawyer and Vera to see. Vera Sterling's reaction, even at this distance, was palpable. Her body stiffened. She didn't scream. The word felony hung in the cooling afternoon air, heavier and colder than the sewage-laden stench drifting down from the ridge. Elias Thorne stood frozen, the full, crushing weight of Rickman's accusation turning his triumph to ashes. He had sought justice. He had unleashed an apocalypse. Sheriff Mason, a stocky man with 30 years of quiet county service, approached slowly, his face etched with a mix of duty and regret. His hand rested on the leather flap of his holster. "Elias," the sheriff's voice was weary, not accusatory. "The EPA is already mobilizing. They've got satellite imagery showing the runoff. The first report cited high levels of chlorine and septic pathogens in the stream. That stream feeds the public drinking supply, Elias. We aren't talking about property damage anymore. This is a public health crisis." Rickman, the lawyer, stepped forward, his suit pristine despite the chaos just up the hill. "We have motive, Sheriff. We have means. Mr. Thorne's cousin, a concrete contractor, was seen meeting him near the highway last night. And we have opportunity. We also have a clear financial injury suffered by Mr. Thorne that ceased the moment Mrs. Sterling suffered a reciprocal injury." He didn't even bother to mention the cemented well, treating it as a distant, irrelevant footnote. Elias finally found his voice, raw and low. The pipe ruptured because she was illegally dumping pool chemicals into a sewage-only septic system. "That's her violation, Rickman. I didn't know the pool line was tied in there. She polluted the reservoir, not me." Rickman smiled, a thin, patronizing expression. "Ignorance of the law, Elias. You introduced a permanent obstruction into a critical drainage line. The resulting pressure surge is your liability. Furthermore, Mrs. Sterling's paperwork, filed last quarter, clearly states the septic field is for low-impact household waste only. She has a separate, permitted overflow system for the pool, which, conveniently for her, failed catastrophically due to unforeseen ground instability caused by trespass and sabotage." Rickman had already created the narrative. Elias was the chaos. Vera was the victim of a cascading failure. You're telling me she had a permit to illegally connect her pool and is now blaming me for the failure of her own criminal setup? Elias felt the bile rise. "I'm telling you," Rickman countered, his voice dropping to a smooth, deadly whisper, "that she has an airtight legal defense for the pool discharge. She can claim it was an accidental diversion resulting from the intentional act of vandalism. You, however, intentionally introduced a hazardous material, fast-set grout, into a waste pathway, causing an ecological event. The environmental damage far outweighs the property damage. The EPA will pursue this as a terrorist-adjacent act of infrastructure sabotage." Sheriff Mason took a heavy step toward Elias. "Elias, I need you to come with me. You need to lawyer up. You need to tell your side, but you need to do it down at the station, not out here. Not with the EPA surveillance planes inbound." Elias looked past the sheriff, past the sleek lawyer, up the hill to the mansion. Vera Sterling was still there, backlit by the setting sun, watching. He saw not just triumph on her face, but something colder, absolute, unshakable control. She had used his own desperate act to spring a trap that leveraged her pre-existing hidden violations against him. "What's the deal, Rickman?" Elias asked, ignoring the sheriff. He knew the arrest was coming, but lawyers like Rickman never bring a massive hammer without offering a price for the handle. Rickman's smile widened, confirming Elias's suspicion. "The deal is this, Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Sterling is a compassionate woman. She understands rage. She knows what it's like to be pushed to the brink. This whole environmental catastrophe can be managed quietly if the focus remains small. If the focus remains you." Rickman paused for dramatic effect. "You confess to the willful and illegal destruction of her well. You sign an affidavit stating you did so out of personal spite and financial duress. In exchange, Mrs. Sterling will not press charges for the sewer line sabotage. She will use her resources, her connections, and her political sway to ensure the EPA investigation focuses on the accidental rupture caused by your prior act of vandalism. You will accept a plea deal, 6 months in county lockup for destruction of private property and reckless endangerment, and she will drop the multi-million-dollar environmental charges. 6 months. A nightmare, but survivable. It was an escape hatch from utter financial ruin and 30 years in a federal prison. And my farm, my home," Elias asked, his heart sinking. "Mrs. Sterling will purchase your property at pre-dispute market value, sufficient to pay off your mortgage and all outstanding debts. You will be free of her, free of debt, and free of the EPA. You will take the hit, she gets her aesthetic piece, and the environmental incident is contained by blaming one small, financially ruined individual. Win-win." The deal was poison-coated in gold. It was exactly what Vera wanted: his land, his silence, and his reputation ruined forever, all while she escaped accountability for the illegal disposal of toxic pool chemicals into a public water source. Elias's hands curled into fists. He looked at the sheriff, who was watching him with a heavy, pained expression, clearly hoping Elias would take the lifeline. "And if I don't?" Elias asked, his voice shaking. "The EPA arrives tonight. Tomorrow, the headlines will read, 'Terrorist Farmer Contaminates County Water Supply.' You will face federal charges for environmental terrorism and reckless endangerment of a municipal water source. You will lose your farm to immediate civil forfeiture. You will spend the rest of your life in federal prison. And Mrs. Sterling will still win the civil suit for damages." Rickman's voice was absolutely devoid of pity. Elias stared at the ground, his mind racing. Confess, lose his farm, do 6 months, and let Vera get away clean. Or fight, expose her illegal activity, and risk life in prison. The sheriff took a step closer. "Elias, don't be a fool. Take the deal. You fought her. You won a round. But this is the end of the fight. Get out now." Elias looked at the cemented well, then up to the ridge. The setting sun caught the massive glass facade of the mansion, turning it into a fortress of blinding light. He thought about the dead seedlings in his greenhouse, the decades of honest work ruined by a whim. He thought about the truth. He looked Rickman straight in the eye. "No deal." Rickman's smug expression dissolved into genuine shock. "Excuse me? You want my confession?" "You can pry it out of my cold, dead hands," Elias spat. "She cemented my well because she was spoiled. I cemented her drain because she destroyed my life. But I didn't know about her illegal chemical line, and I won't take the fall for her environmental crime. You tell Vera Sterling she just traded a small-time farmer for a witness." Before the sheriff could react, Elias turned. His old pickup truck was parked behind the house, keys in the ignition. He knew every logging trail, every hidden creek bed, every ridge line in the county. He had 10 minutes, maybe 5, before the sheriff got the order to block the roads. "Stop, Elias! Don't make this worse!" Sheriff Mason yelled. Finally, reaching for the radio on his shoulder, Elias didn't slow down. He scrambled over the wooden rail of his porch, ran across the dry grass, and vaulted into the truck. The engine roared to life. He didn't take the main drive. He slammed the truck into reverse, smashed through the dilapidated fence line into the woods behind his house, and took off down an overgrown, barely there game trail that hadn't been used in 30 years. He heard the sheriff's siren wail instantly, followed by the roar of the two cruisers peeling out onto the main access road, heading to block the highway exit. They hadn't expected him to go into the forest. Elias gripped the steering wheel, bouncing violently over rocks and fallen timber. He was a fugitive now, running not from a simple charge of vengeance, but from the full force of the EPA, the state, and Vera Sterling's billion-dollar law firm. But he had one thing they didn't: the knowledge of Vera's original crime, the illegal pool connection that Rickman had just accidentally revealed. If Elias could prove she knowingly diverted the chemicals, he could shift the blame from the resulting rupture back onto the root cause, her original, unpermitted environmental violation. He drove hard into the dense, darkening woods, his heart beating a furious rhythm against his ribs. He was heading for Dale, the only person who knew the scale of the sabotage. He needed the official specs on the pipework and a counterattack plan. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out his last remaining item of value, the $2,000 receipt, from the slick downtown lawyer he'd first consulted. He tore it in half, tossing the pieces out the window. He was done playing by their rules. The truck plunged into a dark ravine, the tires spinning for a moment before gaining purchase on the muddy bank. He was running. But as he looked in his rearview mirror, past the receding lights of the sheriff's pursuit and the distant, glittering menace of the Sterling mansion, he saw not fear, but a cold, calculating determination. He wasn't just running from prison. He was running to gather the evidence that would turn Vera Sterling's environmental fortress into her own personal, concrete tomb. He knew where the evidence was, buried deep in the county's archaic public works records. He just needed time to dig it up. He pressed the accelerator, disappearing completely into the woods, knowing that the only way out was through her. Elias Thorne drove his old pickup deeper into the timber, the rusty chassis screaming in protest as it devoured the overgrown logging trail. The forest was his sanctuary, the place where he had spent his life harvesting timber and tapping maple. Every ravine, every outcropping, every deer track was a familiar path. This knowledge was his only shield against the sheriff's dragnet. He drove for 40 minutes, headlights off, guided only by memory and the faint moonlight filtering through the dense canopy. He finally ditched the truck deep in a thicket of rhododendrons near the old abandoned stone quarry, stripping the distributor cap and scattering the wiring just in case the sheriff's department brought in tracking dogs. He was walking now, every footfall silent on the pine needle-covered ground. He hiked west, moving away from the reservoir and the immediate contamination zone, toward the designated meeting point, a dilapidated bait shop on the edge of the county, 20 miles from the Sterling compound. He arrived before sunrise, finding Dale's beat-up Ford van, anonymously parked behind a billboard advertising cheap fishing lures. Elias tapped lightly on the driver's side window. Dale opened the door, his face pale and shadowed. He looked like he hadn't slept or maybe hadn't breathed since Elias's call. "Elias!" Dale hissed, pulling him into the van. "You're an idiot. A magnificent, self-destructive biblical idiot. The whole county's looking for you. They've got choppers up near the reservoir, and I've had 3 routine check-ins from my company's dispatcher, which means Vera's lawyers are already trying to pressure my boss into ratting me out. Did you talk to them?" Elias asked, his eyes scanning the road. "I told them exactly what we agreed. I dropped off an emergency load of grout for a job 50 miles away on the far side of the state line." "I don't know you. I was miles from your house. It was the only lie that wouldn't implicate me in a federal crime." Dale handed him a thermos of hot coffee and a stale, pre-packaged ham sandwich. Elias took a long, grateful sip. "I need one more thing, Dale. The records." Rickman let it slip. Vera had an illegal hookup, the pool drain into the septic line. The lawyers are claiming it was an accidental diversion, but her original approved building permit should show the legal plan. If the legal plan shows no pool connection, that proves she made an unpermitted illegal tie-in, which means her crime, not my plug, is the root cause of the environmental disaster. Dale ran a hand over his face. "You're talking about the County Public Works Archives. That place is a time capsule. Everything's filed on microfiche or dusty paper in the basement. It's impossible to search unless you know the section and the index number. And you can't just walk in, Elias. You're headline news now. They'll have your picture pasted to every copier. I know the place, Elias said, finishing the coffee. I had to spend 3 days there arguing about my barn foundations 5 years ago. I know the old night watchman, Lenny. He's deaf, half-blind, and works the back entrance. And I know the layout of the old records room. The 1980s blueprints are in Section C, Row 4. That's when the area was initially subdivided and the septic permits were first issued. And your plan is, what? Break and enter a government building while being hunted by the sheriff and the EPA? My plan, Elias corrected, pulling a pair of non-prescription glasses and a cheap blazer Dale had stashed in the van, is to look like the exact type of harmless, anal-retentive bureaucrat who spends his nights in the archives. I need an ID badge, a yellow vest, and a clipboard, Dale, and I need a way to get past the main alarm panel. Dale pulled a plastic box from under the passenger seat, filled with tools and contractor supplies. I told my boss I needed to borrow a high-frequency radio jammer for a noisy construction site. You're welcome. It's got about 30 seconds of effective range, tops. After that, the security system knows it's being tampered with. Get in and get out, Elias. If you're not back here by 4 a.m. tomorrow, I'm calling a priest, not a lawyer. The next 20 hours were a study in extreme patience and calculated movement. Elias slept for 4 hours in the back of the van, ate cold cans of beans, and spent the daylight hours studying the County Public Works building from a hidden vantage point across the street. The building was a 3-story, 1960s-era brick structure in the middle of the sleepy county seat. It housed everything from traffic management to zoning. The front entrance was modern with keycard access. The back entrance was a loading dock that doubled as a fire exit, manned by Lenny, the aging watchman. At 1:30 a.m., Elias, dressed in a borrowed, slightly too small yellow safety vest, cheap glasses, and a hat pulled low, walked slowly toward the back of the building. He carried a clipboard heavy with blank forms and a roll of caution tape. He looked official, if slightly inept, the perfect cover. He approached the loading dock. Lenny was visible inside the glass-walled security booth, reading a magazine under a buzzing fluorescent light. Elias placed a hand on his ear and walked straight up to the security window. He knocked sharply on the glass. When Lenny finally looked up, Elias pointed emphatically to the fire exit door, then pointed a finger to the ground, mimicking a leaking pipe, then mimed a large, sweeping arc with his arms, indicating a huge environmental disaster. Lenny, confused but used to late-night emergencies, took off his headphones. Elias leaned close to the window. Emergency environmental response. Sterling property remediation. EPA compliance sweep. Need access to Section C, Row 4, basement archives. Priority Alpha. Elias yelled, exaggerating every syllable. Lenny squinted at the clipboard, then at Elias's generic badge. The word EPA must have registered, overriding his natural skepticism. The chaos from the Sterling compound was the only thing anyone was talking about. Lenny nodded, grumbling, and buzzed the service door open. "Hurry up, fella!" Lenny wheezed, adjusting his thick glasses. "Don't touch nothing." Elias muttered a quick thanks and slipped inside. The air was stale and smelled of ozone and old paper. He moved like a ghost through the labyrinthine, silent hallways down 2 flights of concrete stairs, and into the dark, echoing stillness of the basement archives. He found the main security panel next to the vault door to the most sensitive documents. This was the choke point. Elias pulled out the high-frequency jammer, a small humming device in a metal casing, and placed it on the floor. He pressed the activation button. A faint, low-level whine filled the air, detectable only by electronic sensors. He didn't try to disable the alarm. He only bought himself a window. The control panel's light flickered, indicating a temporary disruption of the radio signal. 30 seconds. Elias sprinted down the narrow aisle, the shelves towering over him like paper cliffs. Section C, Row 4. The area dedicated to large residential infrastructure projects from 1980 to 2005. Dust rose in choking clouds with every movement. He found the file for the Sterling property, subdivision, an oversized, brittle folder marked Lot 14, Ridgeline Development. He flipped through the layers of yellowing paper, zoning amendments, and geological surveys. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that this stack of archaic paper was the linchpin of his freedom. There it was, the original, hand-drawn blueprint of the septic and wastewater system, dated 2003. He traced the heavy black line of the main sewer outflow. It ran from the house to the septic field. He searched the area marked Pool House, Recreational Water. The pool drain line was clearly marked as a separate, permitted line running downhill and discharging into a rock filtration French drain, away from the septic system and the wetland stream. Vera had been caught. The original plan proved that any connection between the pool and the septic line was a subsequent, unpermitted, and illegal tie-in. Rickman's claim of an accidental diversion was a lie. Her action was willful and criminal from the start. Elias pulled out his phone, snapped a dozen high-resolution photos of the blueprint, focusing on the date and the specific annotation regarding the pool line. Beep, 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 the jammer failed. The main security panel in the hallway burst into harsh, flashing red light, accompanied by a deafening siren that cut through the basement silence like a knife. "Intruder! Intruder in Sector Gamma!" the automated voice echoed, bouncing off the concrete walls. Elias shoved the folder back onto the shelf, knowing he had to get out. But his adrenaline-fueled rush had just hit an immovable object. He turned to run, but a voice, clear and cold, cut through the alarm's clamor from the top of the stairs. "Don't move. Elias, I knew you'd come for the paper trail. You should have taken the 6 months." Vera Sterling stood silhouetted at the top of the basement stairs, not in a silk robe, but in a tailored black suit, her face immaculate, holding a small silver-plated pistol aimed steadily at his chest. She hadn't sent the police. She had come for him herself, betting that his desperation would lead him to the one place her money couldn't easily erase, the truth. The only way out was up the stairs, past the woman who held both the gun and the key to his freedom. The confrontation had just become deeply personal. The sound of the security siren was a physical force, a piercing, high-frequency scream that hammered the concrete walls of the basement archive. Dust motes, disturbed by Elias's frantic search, danced violently in the harsh, flashing red light, giving the scene a grotesque, blood-soaked luminescence. Vera Sterling stood at the top of the stairs, her tailored black suit a stark contrast to the grime. Her face, usually a mask of frosty disdain, was tight with fury, but her hand was steady on the silver-plated pistol. "Throw the phone down. Elias," she ordered, her voice cutting through the noise with chilling clarity. "I know what you took pictures of. I know what Rickman inadvertently told you. It doesn't matter. This document disappears tonight. You, however, will disappear forever." Elias stood motionless between the towering shelves, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt the weight of the phone in his pocket, the evidence of the illegal, unpermitted pool-to-septic tie-in, the key to proving that Vera, not his act of revenge, was the true source of the county's environmental disaster. "You're wrong, Vera," Elias shouted over the siren. "It doesn't disappear." "It's too late." "Oh? Did you call the sheriff?" she mocked, her lip curling. "He's still up on the ridge, chasing shadows in your woods." "Did you email it to the press? In a basement with a jamming device that just failed? I highly doubt it." She took a step down, the click of her expensive heels sharp on the concrete. "Give me the phone. This ends now. You take the 6 months, you keep your freedom, and you'll live to regret this stupidity." Elias knew he was cornered, but the fear was replaced by a cold, calculating rage. He wasn't afraid of dying here. He was afraid of her winning. "You want the phone?" Elias held his hands up slowly, his fingers inching toward his jacket pocket. "I'll give you the phone. But you need to understand something first, Vera. You used 2 feet of cement to try and erase me. I used 45 seconds of quickset grout to try and erase your sewage. But you forgot one thing about water and waste. It finds a way, and once the current is moving, you can't stop it." He slowly pulled his phone out, holding it clearly in the flashing light. "This blueprint," Elias continued, his voice dangerously level, "proves you are the source of the chemical contamination. The fine is not $2 million a day for me. It's $2 million a day for you, Vera, and Rickman knows it. He tried to frame me to save your fortune. But I didn't send the photos to the press or the sheriff. Vera scoffed. Then who, Elias? Your cousin the contractor? Elias shook his head, a wry, desperate smile touching his lips. No. I sent them to the one person who cares more about the paperwork than they do about your money. I sent them to Lenny. Vera froze, her eyes widening. Lenny, the ancient deaf night watchman she had completely discounted. Lenny may be half blind, but he runs the archives. He's obsessed with proper procedure and paperwork integrity, Elias pressed, pushing his only advantage. Before I jammed the alarm, I sent the pictures, the proof of a fabricated public works document, to his personal email with a subject line that read, Urgent. Evidence of illegal archives tampering. He's an hour behind the times, but he's already up there looking at his inbox, wondering why the basement alarm is going off. He's not calling the sheriff, Vera. He's calling the chief of public works to report a document violation. It was a masterful, reckless bluff. Elias had only had time to take the photos, not send them. But the fear of bureaucratic truth hitting the right desk was more potent than any threat of violence to Vera. Vera's pistol hand wavered slightly. She wasn't worried about the police. She was worried about the chain of command, knowing she was physically covering up a public works fraud. That's a lie, she hissed, taking another shaky step down the stairs. Is it? Elias challenged, looking past her. Listen, he pointed to the ceiling. The deafening siren continued, but now a new sound cut in. Faint, but unmistakable, a furious tinny sound of a door being slammed and keys rattling upstairs. Lenny, responding to the alarm and the hypothetical email, was moving. He was following protocol, and protocol was about to deliver Vera Sterling into the hands of the system she thought she owned. Vera looked up, her expensive facade cracking. In that moment of distraction, Elias acted. He didn't charge her. Instead, he slammed his phone, screen up, onto the concrete floor between the shelves, then simultaneously kicked the steel shelving unit next to him with all his strength. The old shelf, overloaded with decades of paper, rattled violently. A massive, brittle stack of blueprints from the top shelf, files labeled Municipal Water Treatment Plant Phase 2, came tumbling down. The paper avalanche wasn't heavy, but it was suffocating. It enveloped Elias in a cloud of blinding, yellowed paper and ancient dust. Vera, startled by the noise and the sudden plume of debris, flinched. The silver pistol discharged with a deafening crack that momentarily muted the alarm. The bullet struck the steel shelving unit where Elias had just been standing, sending a spray of sparks into the air. Elias, using the few seconds of cover, rolled into the adjacent aisle. He scrambled under the fallen blueprints, breathing the dusty air. He heard Vera curse, coughing, trying to find him through the haze. "Don't make this worse, Elias!" she screamed. "If I have to hunt you, I won't stop at the archives. I'll burn your name to the ground! You already did!" Elias yelled back from the floor. He spotted a heavy, rusty fire extinguisher bolted to the wall nearby. Using the chaos of the paper and the deafening siren, he lunged for it. He ripped the extinguisher from the wall and, without standing, aimed the nozzle around the shelf corner. He pulled the pin and squeezed the handle. A blinding cloud of white chemical powder, dry, fine, and instantly debilitating, erupted, shooting directly at the stairwell. Vera let out a guttural shriek as the chemical fire suppressant engulfed her. She stumbled back up the stairs, blinded and choking. The silver pistol clattered down the concrete steps, sliding to a stop near Elias's feet. Elias pushed himself up, grabbing the pistol. The basement door at the top of the stairs burst open, and Lenny, the night watchman, appeared, looking furious and holding a heavy wooden broom like a weapon. He stopped dead, confronted by the white haze and the shrieking alarm. Behind Lenny, two men in shirt sleeves, one holding a phone, looked down with horrified, disbelieving expressions. The chief of public works and an accompanying staffer, called in by Lenny's emergency document tampering report. Vera, covered head to toe in white powder. Her black suit, a ghastly canvas, was leaning against the wall, trying to wipe the chemicals from her eyes. Elias stepped out from the shelves, the silver pistol held loosely in his hand, the phone with the damning photos still lying face up on the floor, its screen glowing. He spoke in a hoarse, exhausted voice. "Chief, Elias said, addressing the man at the top of the stairs. "My name is Elias Thorne. I'm the farmer the sheriff is looking for. This woman, Vera Sterling, just attempted to murder me to destroy evidence that she illegally tied her chemical pool drain into her septic line, causing the contamination event up on the ridge." He pointed to the glowing phone on the floor. "The blueprint on that phone proves her guilt. The gun in my hand proves her intent. Now, if you'd please call Sheriff Mason, I'm ready to come in and make a full statement." The aftermath. Justice cemented. The end was not a quiet, satisfied closure for Elias, but a deafening, chaotic exposure for Vera. Sheriff Mason arrived, followed by a swarm of state police and, inevitably, the EPA. Elias surrendered peacefully, giving the pistol to the sheriff. He didn't deny cementing the sewer line, but his confession was now wrapped in the larger, more explosive truth, an act of desperate, small-scale retribution that uncovered a massive, premeditated environmental crime committed by Vera Sterling. The photos of the original blueprint, confirmed instantly by the Chief of Public Works, were irrefutable. Vera Sterling was arrested on multiple counts: attempted murder, aggravated assault, breaking and entering a government building, and, most critically, the original EPA felony for unauthorized discharge of regulated pollutants into a public water source. The $2 million daily fine, momentarily aimed at Elias, now slammed into Vera Sterling, the liability for the contamination event firmly anchored to her pre-existing criminal actions. Elias was charged with destruction of private property and reckless endangerment, but his legal landscape had completely changed. His lawyer, now highly motivated and pro bono for the massive public relations win, negotiated a suspended sentence and heavy community service. He was a folk hero, the small man who struck back and exposed the corrupt elite. The ultimate irony was the fate of the Sterling mansion. With the environmental investigation in full swing, the EPA placed a comprehensive freeze on all activity, including the necessary repairs to the main sewer line. Due to the catastrophic nature of the concrete plug and the subsequent chemical backflow, the mansion was deemed uninhabitable until full remediation, testing, and replumbing could be completed, a process that would take months, if not years, under federal supervision. The last image Elias saw as he was driven away in the back of the patrol car wasn't of his farm, but of the Sterling mansion. It stood magnificent and pristine on the ridge, an island of obscene wealth, but it was paralyzed, a beautiful, sterile monument built on ego, rendered unusable because it was drowning, slowly.